Welcome back, listeners. Thanks for returning. We're about to get going on our next season 1B episode, which is called Alone Together. And before I bother Daria for her opinions, I just want to say this is Baby's first episode order glitch.
Oh, okay.
In the airing order, a different episode aired after Lion 3. And the actual intended order, based on an episode list that Ian Jones-Cordy released after season 1 had finished airing, he said Alone Together comes after Lion 3. So that's how I always order them too. It's not that big a deal. If anybody was going to freak out and say, why isn't such and such episode playing after Lion 3? It's because this is the intended order. So we didn't skip anything. Don't worry. It'll be next. Yeah. So now that explanation is out of the way.
We'll get there soon enough.
Yeah. So now I'm allowed to ask you if you have any impressions of this title, Alone Together.
Well, I have a very specific impression of this title this time. And that's because depending on what happens in the future and when this episode goes out, we're recording this still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of people have been staying home and isolating themselves or quarantining or what have you. And the radio station here, their segment on ways to keep healthy or keep entertained or keep all that sort of thing, and to keep socializing with others even when you're at home by yourself, is called Alone Together. And obviously that's been something that's been on the radio a lot. So that's my first context of this title, is how to socialize when you've got stuck at home.
Whereas I was kind of backwards, and when I saw that hashtag going around, Alone Together, I'm like, oh, Steven Universe. So, yeah. Alone and together. It sounds like an oxymoron, but we're going to find a way.
Let's see what oxymoronic things they do this week.
We are the crystal gems. We'll always save the day. And if you think we can, we'll always find.
Oh,
that was a ride.
Yeah. If you watch this episode straight after the previous one, you'll be in for such mood whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
Ow.
Need some recovery time there.
There is emotion and metaphor and just plain fun everywhere in this. All right. We open with Stephen executing some curious dance steps alongside the other 3 crystal gems. And he's not quite as coordinated as the sisters, taking about as seriously as you think, but he's not really falling into line with the others. Turns out this is all they're trying to teach him to fusion dance, to fuse. He is not successful. At the end, they say it's okay. No one expects you to be able to do it right away. He goes down the beach with Connie to chat about it. He says it's not just about getting the steps right, but being in sync and everything. And Connie admits that she's not danced in front of anyone before. And Stephen says, oh, come on, you can dance. And she says that he's someone she'd be in front of right now. So, and this is adorable. He starts music on his smartphone or his iPod or whatever that is, and holds out his hand to dance with her, but covering his eyes with the other hand. Mm-hmm. And they do start to dance, and it's gorgeous. And they start having a good time and sort of look into each other's faces during a dip and blush a bit. Then there is a familiar pink glow, and we return to someone's first person view, looking down at their long legs and long arms and holding up Stephen and Connie's shoes against their feet and not saying, why do they not fit? And they and we quickly realize that Stephen and Connie have fused. And the new being, who is sort of another tall, adult-shaped, fusion of Stephen and Connie with elements of both their looks and clothes. They are overjoyed about this and rush back to the beach house to show the other gems. And the gems are stunned for a bit before Amethyst is just giggling with delight and asks Stephen, Connie, Stevonnie how they feel. I was going to say thank you, Amethyst, for saying that. Otherwise, I have to dodge around trying to say the new being's name for the rest of the episode. And Amethyst thinks it's great. Pearl thought it should be impossible, or at the very least inappropriate, which is rude, but that delivery of inappropriate is one of the most Pearl things I've ever heard.
Yes.
Garnet is staring with a fixed grin on her face. And she says to Stevonnie, you're not one person. You're not two people. You are an experience. Go and be the best experience you ever had. And Stevonnie bounds off into town, goes to Big Donut and gets 2 donuts. And both Lars and Sadie are just swooning over them and are stunned and give them the donuts for free, which Stevonnie says isn't a great business practice, but they got 2 donuts out of it. They pause and contemplate the donuts of being one for me and one for me because, as Garnet said, they are not 2 people, they are not one people, but also they are 2 people and they are one people. Sour Cream pops along, or Sour-Faced Stranger, as Stevonnie covers to recognize him, tells them about a rave on tonight at the warehouse. Stevonnie enthusiastically agrees to go. They do. And when they start really getting into the dancing, the other people on the dance floor stand back, taken aback, and this gives Stevonnie something like a panic attack. The bubble forms around them looking like a disco ball. Given the surrounding events, not sure if this is actually happening or if it's a metaphor, but they need to go and hyperventilate against the wall when a rather full of himself chap comes into the ball and insists that he dance with them and sort of gets kind of sleazy about it. They try to withdraw. Kevin gets very insistent despite Stevonnie's reluctance. And they take to the dance floor, basically saying to Kevin, right, if you want to see dancing, you're going to see dancing. They get very into it to the point that Kevin is turning blue with alarm. And somewhere in all this, they unfuse back into Stephen and Connie. Kevin goes something like, it's 2 kids, I'm out of here, as if this is sort of something he's familiar with. Stephen and Connie laugh in relief, and Sour Cream, DJing, throws 3 glow sticks out to the crowd. And we go to credits. So again, in terms of actual events, not very much. It's not a complex plot, but, significance of fusing and so much feels in this. The design of Stevonnie combined with their voice actor is just perfect. There are bits where you can hear bits of Connie-isms and Stephen-isms coming through in the delivery. And especially with the parts where they talked to the other gems, I actually found a bit of a transgender coming out metaphor in this. This is the first time you're showing up as yourself kind of thing, especially the way Garnet encouraged them to go out there and be yourself and was just thrilled to see them presenting this way. And Amethyst not taking it too deeply, but still thinking it's kind of awesome. And just their delight at going out on the town as Stevonnie. And then a real thing when things got a bit much at the rave, which is, again, another common early going out as your true gender trans experience, as sometimes you may take it a bit far. I wonder if you've taken it a bit far or it all catches up with you. And that is very much what Stevonnie's like freaking out and hyperventilation felt like. And okay, it's not really a metaphor for when you split back into 2 people on a dance floor, but
no, probably not.
But it was all just played so well, and
this is an incredible episode. Really.
And while this doesn't quite go to the metaphor, I like the debate Stevonnie was having with himself, both as one person or as 2 people, both at once. Just the way it was expressed and worded. Like the very first thing, I think it was, Stephen, why doesn't your shoe fit my foot? Which is right there addressing Stephen and being Stephen because they expect Stephen's shoe to fit because they're Stephen, but they're talking to Stephen as if they're Connie.
Right. It's going back and forth. Like, why is your sandal too big for your foot?
But they're not
small. Sorry.
They're not in conflict. They're not divided. They're 2 minds are fused, but still 2.
Right.
They don't suddenly split into Connie and Stephen bickering in Stevonnie's head or something.
Right. It's very sort of stirred together.
Yeah. And that also makes, especially in terms of the series, this is one of the first times we sort of looked at how a fusion's mind works in that way.
Right. Right.
We saw a bit of it with Opal when Opal sang back to Stephen. But a lot of time, well, the other times, just Fusion's personality just sort of seems to be ready-made and not really dividing until it comes time to actually re-divide, like Alexandrite trying to eat and not eat all at once.
Right. Yeah, we've never seen like the first time it happens for any of them. So it's kind of like, oh, we're seeing them develop what their identity even is, like right there in front of us.
Yeah, and they're pretty stable because they contemplated their duality back and forth, but didn't instantly prize apart as Opal and kind of Alexandrite did.
Right.
And it also makes you wonder if with more traditional fusions, their names just pop into their head, or does someone name them as Amethyst did here? But as has been pointed out, there's never been a human fusion before.
Right. Yeah. And especially since Steven doesn't even use a gem name. It's like, well, what else were they going to do, right? Yeah, there's so much that we've never seen before, but we don't know how much of it is typical because we didn't even know you could fuse with a human.
Yeah, and I guess, again, this is Steven being not half gem, half human, but gem and human, that his human body could fuse the way a gem's could. And it wasn't just that parts of him tried to fuse, or that he couldn't fuse because his body was flesh and blood, and that his fuse magic apparently works on someone else who is flesh and blood.
Yeah, that's the part that's really intriguing, that he could do that to someone who is not part gem at all.
Yeah, and that Connie, so far as we could tell, was comfortable being part of the experience of Stevonnie.
Right.
They were a bit discombobulated because this just happened, but got into the swing of things pretty quickly.
Right. And that like they sort of wake up as themselves and realize what's happened. And then like they're both part of what's going on there. So it's kind of, we don't quite know how either Steven or Connie would have reacted to that, like until after they'd be separated. You could ask them, what did they think? But you only know what Stevonnie thinks while they're running around.
And again, the fused minds, when they are stable anyway, tend to not just be half and half, but work together. Steven's understanding of fusion is enough to help Connie, who it's not like the Connie half freaks out and splits away.
Right. Must have been really interesting, like talking to the gems that way, because Steven knows them very well and Connie doesn't know them very well at all, but they're able to kind of talk about, you know, like Stevonnie saying to Pearl, like, aren't you proud of him? Even though Steven's in there somewhere.
Yeah, I guess the fusions are both part of the people they are made from and not part of the people they are made from.
It's a living relationship.
Because they referred to Steven in the third person, even though they're talking about things Steven was the only part of them present for.
That's right. Yeah. It's very interesting.
And Stevonnie is one of the more stable fusions we've seen. Doesn't last as long. Hasn't lasted the longest.
Right.
But didn't instantly break apart like Opal or Alexandrite.
That's right.
Whose common element was Pearl. So, you know, I think she needs to work on herself in some ways.
Yeah.
Because, when Pearl wasn't part of Sugalite, and Sugalite stayed together for, well, longer than anyone wanted, but took some doing to uncouple.
Yeah. Seems like Pearl would be brittle. It seems like it's easy to upset her, and that she would probably feel strongly enough about something that she could easily cause a fission in a fusion.
But I was impressed all round with this episode, especially because you don't need the metaphor to make the episode work. It can be just about fusing. But as a trans girl, I just felt so much about what they were saying and doing and going through.
Yeah.
Very familiar stuff. And of course, Garnet's expression was just hilarious. So.
Gosh, I just fell in love with Garnet all over again, the way that she encouraged them, And like, it's funny to see her smile that big, but it's wonderful that that's what made her do it, is seeing, Steven is able to have this experience, and here's this new person that she can talk to and encourage and say, you are an experience, and just go have fun. It's beautiful. So good. They actually used that thing where Amethyst is saying, Pearl, look at Garnet. And they just flash over to her and she's grinning hugely. They used that as like a short promo for this episode, but you didn't know what she was about. So funny. It's so cute. It just came off really sincere because, I mean, even the way that Garnet is, she's still pretty low-key and stoic, but you could feel that she was excited. So wonderful. Beautiful. So did you immediately guess that the gems were teaching him fusion dances, or did you just think they were dancing?
I thought that might be what was happening, just because I couldn't immediately think of any other reason for the gems to be holding a dance class.
Right. And Pearl saying, like, synchronize. Yeah, it's like they could have ended that scene and said, like, we're never going to be ready for the Beach-a-Palooza in time or whatever. That would have been a nice switch up. I really loved their little dances. I like, Steven trying to emulate them, and he's not really like hip enough to get Amethyst's club vibe.
Yeah, they can jump and freeze in the air like a freeze frame, but he just falls down because that's what happens.
Ooh, yeah. He's trying to be graceful with Pearl, and he just runs into her leg, and he can't be as fast as Garnet. But
some of that you kind of saw with Connie doing the sort of thing Stephen might usually try to do, but now gifted with Connie's coordination because she does things like tennis lessons and who knows what else.
Yeah. It was just such a sweet scene when he was dancing with her. Just such a pure little scene where they're holding each other's hands and kind of being a little bit awkward, but clearly pretty comfortable with each other, that they can see each other like this. It's so sweet. I loved it.
I also noticed when they were sitting opposite each other, that's where we really see a scale thing, because Stephen's legs stretched out all the way aren't as long as the top half of Connie's legs.
Yeah, he's got these cute little tree trunk legs. Cutie pie. I appreciate that. She's shy and says she doesn't really have friends, and the idea that she wanted to go to a dance and have that experience and she just couldn't bring herself to do it. But then with Steven, she can, Oh, I love it. I love their relationship because, you kind of see it as early sweethearts, right? Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, this is inappropriate because, kids that young shouldn't be dating or something. It just feels very like whatever their love is, it's love that's appropriate for them, and it feels right. It feels genuine.
Yeah, and it's very pure in the sense of whatever you want to call it. These are two people who enjoy being around each other.
Yeah, never like goes into too adult territory with them. You just believe it. So,
and they both sort of still there, still laughing when they unfused, and one didn't entirely just freak out and go, "What did we just do?" and head for the hills.
I loved that. I really liked that they both laughed and cried and then just kind of jumped around jubilant that they had been through whatever the heck this was. But I like that you don't feel like either of them felt differently than the other about the experience, and that either of them was scared off or we're going to end the episode and then that's going to be awkward for a while or something. Like you feel like they both were a little confused and overwhelmed, but enjoyed it.
Yeah, the stuff with Kevin, they probably pushed that as far as they could without it being entirely a game breaker in terms of content and mood.
Yes.
Because he was highly inappropriate and pushy and coming on too strong. And if they'd gone much further, this would have taken into a darker or at least different territory. But it was just enough to make you feel bad about what he was doing, but not break the episode, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you can just kind of see Stevonnie reacting to that, like, huh? And ooh, like, I don't like this. I don't know why I don't like this, but I'm uncomfortable and I'm running away.
A bit of an air of this isn't what I signed up for.
Right. I just thought I was going to go to a cool dance party and dance. And now everybody's staring at me like I did something weird and I don't like it. And it's not what I imagined. I'm supposed to like it and I didn't.
And Kevin is sort of put back into the realms of ridiculous when he just goes, "Oh, it's two kids. I'm out of here." In a way
at least he left the children alone.
Yeah, he doesn't sound as surprised as one should if one's prospective dance partner suddenly turns into two children.
Yeah, you're right. It should definitely be a much bigger shock.
And in fact, the other people at the dance seemed far more shocked about Stevonnie dancing than about their separating into two people.
Yeah, and sour cream's just like, screw it, I'm throwing glow stick, yay! Just surreal a little bit right there at the end.
Well, given what we've seen of the Beach Citizens so far, maybe at that point they went, oh, it's tied up with those gems, right, whatever.
That hot stranger was gem magic.
Okay, now we know what we're dealing with. We just thought they were really attractive, but they're actually magic, so okay, that we know.
Yeah, well, that was pretty interesting too. Like design wise with Stevonnie, like I think they came up pretty androgynous, but like the way that they presented was more classically feminine, I guess. And that's probably part of the reason that Kevin referred to them as girl at one point. And, you know, people like fans who use the wrong pronoun always default to she. So
I mean, yeah, without getting too deep on the notion of perception of gender, I could also see if someone just sort of tuned in halfway through and didn't really know the show of thinking they were a she.
Right. Partly just the clothing that you don't see a lot of men in belly shirts, like just with their midriff exposed.
And they had, as you said, kind of classically feminine shape, the long hair, and there was a bit of a bust line and hips.
I'm not quite sure about whether it kind of seemed like definitely the hips were the more obvious part of it. I'm not sure about the bust thing. Kind of just was indeterminate, and definitely the voice actor was a woman, which also made sense just because, I mean, they both are the children both have high voices, so you want someone with a higher voice. So, you know. Well,
I think the shirt that was sort of part Connie's dress, part Stephen's shirt sort of gave the impression of a bust line, maybe more than there actually was.
Stuff, yeah, but like I could see, like I'd be curious as to what Sadie and Lars's perception was. Like, were they expressing that they were attracted to somebody that they were perceiving as androgynous, or was Lars thinking that's a hot girl and was Sadie thinking that's a hot guy? You know what I mean? Like, were they straight, or were they like, well, let's just say everybody's queer?
Or were they just that beautiful?
Right. Sometimes it doesn't matter, you know, but I do wonder if like both of them think they're straight and thought they saw the gender they're attracted to, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it doesn't matter though. They don't talk about it.
You can kind of perceive the missing scene. You can kind of imagine the missing scene straight after Stevonnie leaves, where one says she was hot. You mean he was hot? And get into an argument over that.
Yeah. Let's just say they. It was confirmed by writers after this that they used they, them. So that's nice. Even though there was no specific, like, obvious time when they were referred to that way, that couldn't have been interpreted as somebody was calling them by the plural because the gems said they.
Yeah. Well, I took a bit of a punt because I thought if there's any show that's going to normalize singular they, it's going to be this one.
Oh, 100%. And that, like, other fusions have always been referred to as she, but they're also made up of people who use the pronoun she. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that at least makes you understand, like, they're not calling them they because there's more than one in there. So when you see somebody call Stevonnie they, then you know what they mean. It's singular they. Appreciate that. So...
That trivial part of me did notice that, they had the $3 bill again.
Yep.
And sort of makes you go, so what happens to their possessions when they fuse?
Right. Was that, I'm assuming that was in Stephen's pockets.
Also noticed they left their donuts behind after all that anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, they were kind of gnawing on one of them sitting on the bench out there, and then sour cream comes along. And they have to pretend sour cream is a stranger, and then they just kind of walk away.
Yeah, I always notice when people on TV do stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like, what about your donuts? What about your free donuts? That's one for you and one for you. That was cool when Stevonnie stood up from the bench, and like they're like taller than sour cream, and it's like, whoa, they're tall.
And managed to get a bit of a mix in the hair. I mean, both of them have black hair, so it makes sense Stevonnie has black hair, but it was kind of a bit curly like Steve, but also long like Connie.
Yep. Yeah, they did a good job with that. And sometimes the lighting is a little weird, so it's hard to tell with the colors, but it looks like they kind of blended their skin colors together and the shape of the face and everything. But even though they've done that with the design, they're also they have enough of their own individuality that you're not thinking, oh, this is a mishmash. This is like a Mr. Potato Head.
Yeah, and it didn't come out as like patchwork or something. It didn't have like half short, half long hair, one pale, one dark arm or anything like that.
I love that they don't do that and that they give them their own voices. And like you were saying, you could hear sort of Stephen-isms in the way that they talk and Connie-isms, like that you could hear where they come from, but it's almost more like it's their child than pieces of them. It's like you can see where they get it.
I could definitely hear Stephen, and in fact, almost to the point that my brain remembers Stephen with that doesn't seem a very sound business practice line.
Yeah, there you go. Weirdly enough, some people reacting to this episode seemed to think it was more Connie than anything, which I completely disagree with. Like it seemed like when it wasn't a sort of completely different person that is understood as a living embodiment of their relationship, you could hear things that you would attribute to Stephen and or Connie just as often as each other. I don't know why so many people thought that it was like, oh, that was mostly Connie in control, maybe just because of the panic attack type thing that seemed more of a Connie thing.
Yeah, I mean, I could understand how a superficial viewing might give that impression, but I think if you're watching hard, even if you're not doing a deep dive podcast, that you're going to notice bits. And well, the reflexive, now to go for a donut, that's Stephen all over.
Yes. Yeah, Connie's not even allowed to eat donuts. They have trans fats.
Oh, there you go. I wonder if after they separated, Connie worried if the trans fats went into her or Stephen.
Stephen did ask that question in Giant Woman, like, what if one of you ate, whose stomach would it go into? It's like, now you get to find out. I don't know.
That sounds like the sort of question that you come up with just to expressly not answer.
Yeah. Yeah. This it would be really interesting if Connie had been wearing a beret or something, and then when they unfused, Stephen had it. That would be interesting. But it seems like that didn't happen at all, like that they came apart with the same correct clothes and everything.
Yeah, I think, and this is just me guessing, but we're going into the meta behind the scenes thing, that they don't want to sort of establish cross-contamination in fusing and defusing. Mm-hmm. That when you fuse with someone and you unfuse, you're still yourself. You have all the experiences of your fusion, but you don't. And again, we've only seen bits so far, but Stephen probably hasn't come away with tennis skills or
right
a sudden bunch of book learning, and Connie probably hasn't suddenly learned to play video games.
Yes. I was pondering that because I was wondering kind of the other way as to whether Stevonnie would have all of their skills. I mean, it seems like they would be able to play tennis because Connie can. And I assumed that they would be able to play the ukulele. So
I've always thought that skills and aspects kind of complement each other rather than sort of pick and choose when a fusion comes together. I mean, I even saw some of that with Sugalite, who is probably the strongest case if you want to make one thus far, or a fusion's just a totally separate person.
Right. It's probably sort of similar to like the way that the weapons work. Like you can see them pull out each other's weapons, but then also make something else from them that is not either of those things, but has been made from them.
Yeah. And I suppose also, if we're going to continue to develop Stephen and Connie's relationship, if they are indeed hinting at a romance, if they came away off bits of each other's minds and feelings, that could make things incredibly awkward.
I don't know if I guess I'm just going to make kind of a judgment. This was quite a while later into the show, but people have asked questions about the nature of fusion, and Rebecca did answer about how much do they really get to share? Is it like you're blending your minds together? Do you share your thoughts and stuff? Because I mean, what if you had something you didn't feel comfortable telling the other person? But she said you should conceive of fusions as the people's relationship. It's an embodiment of a relationship. And if something is not part of that relationship, it also will not be part of the fusion. So it kind of answered my question as to you don't like to think of this, but if you had a secret and you didn't want to share it with the other person, you wouldn't be in danger of them finding it out if you fused with them, which is cool.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, there are secrets that can be kept for entirely healthy reasons too. So
Sure.
it might not be something you're keeping directly from the other person, just sort of something you don't want them to know if you see the difference.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like you just wouldn't have necessarily any reason to bring up, hey, this is how I felt about my parents or whatever. But then, it's not something that you wouldn't share with the other person. You just haven't. Then that might still be something that you would be able to know or experience if you were together. But then if there was something that you felt like, okay, I don't want to bring this into my relationship with this person, then it wouldn't be part of the relationship.
Yeah, or it might be, I want to tell the other person this. I don't want it just leaked into their mind. So
right. So it is a very sort of a foreign idea, though, because the idea of a relationship having its own consciousness is not something that we have an equivalent for as humans. So there are a lot of sort of metaphors that we could conceive of it as. I mean, it's indisputable that that would also be pretty, it would be intimate. So people compare it with, oh, that's like they're having a romantic relationship, or that it's an allegory for a sexual relationship, which, it's even like kind of this early on in the show, people were saying that was inappropriate to show children doing that. And I, obviously I object strongly to that, because I get really angry when people act like there are no intimate relationships unless they're sexual and therefore inappropriate. It's like, well, if you think that that's what it was, then Steven's moms were trying to teach him to do it in the living room. Okay.
yeah, which is
So I don't think,
and hilarious.
Yeah, Pearl still called it inappropriate, but not because of that.
And in fact, that's another line well trod. And Pearl's inappropriate thing came the closest to breaking this, but that Pearl calls almost everything she doesn't like inappropriate, save this. In that, again, they could have very easily have made a sex metaphor out of it.
Right. And I just think that there are comparisons, just because any kind of intimacy will be compared to the most popular form of intimacy in cinema.
Yeah. And, they didn't even go to double entendres, which would have been very tempting to do or very easy to do. And even on this show, we made some comparisons of fusion to sex when Pearl covered Stephen's eyes back when Superlight was first formed. But again, that was the closest then, and they went even further from that in this episode, because they didn't want to go there with children characters, or they just didn't want to go there at all. And I think the way Stephen and Connie's relationship has been so far, I think even if they were older at a, if you like, sexually appropriate age, I wouldn't want to see this done as that.
No.
I want the purity of self and self, if you will.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the exact same thing. And not because I'm being like sex negative or anything. I know I have an asexual perspective on it and everything, but and it's not coming from that. It's that, when we talk about the quote purity of something, we're talking about it as you want to see the identity thing explored, and you want to see that focused on, rather than let's just find a new way to ship people.
Yeah, this is, I was going to borrow the old cliche. We're all talking hearts, not parts, but actually all their parts came together.
Yeah. And it does raise some questions about, if they stayed fused longer, how they would go about their lives. Because they are, at the end of the day, they still come apart into two people. And, what if they were going to go home? It's like, what Connie's parents think?
Yeah. I can see why their first choice of who to show off to was Stephen's parents, not Connie's.
Right. That they at least would know what it was. They were just trying to fuse, and then he went and did it. So it was not expected. It was not presented as an option, even like that he could fuse with humans. So. Yeah.
And given this was almost literally the last thing we saw in the episode, of course, I don't know how it's going to go going forward, but I felt their time as Stevonnie concluded naturally. They didn't, even though things were getting intense, it didn't feel like they were forced apart, a la Opal disagreeing with herself.
That's right. It was just sort of like, oh, they were dancing real hard and then just they were done.
It's like, we've done this. We've had our Stevonnie time for now. Now it's time to go back to, or rather, I've had my Stevonnie time for now. It's time for me to go back to Stephen and Connie. And of course, it remains to be seen if they can deliberately refuse or how easily, given this was entirely accidental.
Yeah, Stephen has a history of that kind of stuff. And this is this is the third time that one of the appearances of his new powers had to do with Connie.
Yeah. She's like his power muse.
Yeah. To protect Connie from the falling rocks and then the healing. And then all of them, I guess, were things that he is expected to do later and struggled with.
She might be one of the people who Stephen's protective instinct extends most to, because most of the people, well, in fact, all the people he spends any kind of extended amount of time with are a super powerful alien interplanetary space gem being, or his dad, who at the very least is an adult man.
Yes.
And when you're a kid, and I think Stephen still has some of this despite his atypical upbringing, adults, they're strong, they're powerful, they protect you, not the other way around.
Right.
Whereas Connie is his own age, give or take. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, I don't think it's a gender thing at all that she's the girl and needs protecting, but that she is on his level and doesn't have he does know other people don't have powers. She's at least that aware. So his instinct comes out, go, oh, I can, even if unconsciously his power lobe, for want of a better word, is thinking, oh, I can do something about this and stop the mortal human girl getting squished by the rock. That happens.
Yep.
I certainly don't think he's got any protector of the cave, I'm the man one about it.
No, definitely not a Stephen trait.
But, and we've seen that even in completely unpowered, mundane mortal situations, he still likes to help. So that could mix in with it. Ultimately, protecting someone from being squished is still, you like to help them.
Right. It's like, yeah, exactly. The tendency he has to want to fulfill needs, like joking victim. He's like, oh, Lars is not here to help you. I'll work at the Big Donut. And it's utterly a mundane thing, but he's just like, I'm going to do it. I will step up and take care of this because I'm Stephen.
Yeah. And this is something I've always liked about this show, that Stephen, while he's aware of the differences, he doesn't completely differently contextualize magic stuff and mundane stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's more things he can do and things he cannot immediately do.
Yeah, just specifically to this episode, obviously the fusion is a gem thing, but then when Stevonnie is Stevonnie, like they are focused on, I'm going to have an experience as a cool teen, I'm going to do something I've never done before. And that's a mundane thing.
And another perfect merging of Connie and Stephen attributes, the desire to be cool, which one ostensibly never has been, that's Connie, and the desire to just go out and have fun, that's Stephen.
Right.
So that is a perfectly fused motive.
Yeah, and it seems like kind of the dance thing was focused on fusion for Stephen, but then Connie expressed like, I wish that I could dance in front of people. And Stephen is kind of, he doesn't care about like anybody looking at him. He's like, I'll be on stage and I'll be loud and I am an extrovert. And, that Stevonnie can borrow that and be that for a moment and enjoy what Connie has wanted.
Yeah, I have been historically, granted, we've seen 4 fusions so far, as far as I know, right? Sugilite,
Alexandrite,
and Stevonnie. Yeah, so we've seen 4, which isn't a huge pool to draw from, but this is the icing on the cake of I like how they do fusions, things that they as you said, they get their own actor. They're not both actors overlaid on top of each other or switching back and forth, which could be an interesting way to do it, but it's not how they approach it here. That you can see a lot of the time when different aspects of a component, a member of a fusion, have combined with other aspects to produce a third trait, which is not necessarily a blend, but is still feeding from them. Mm-hmm. Even some of Sugilite's more antisocial tendencies seem to come from a backfiring of merging her components.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of stuff to say about psychoanalyzing Sugilite, but it will require a better reveal of Amethyst and Garnet's pasts, so I cannot talk about it yet. I have written like a couple of essays psychoanalyzing Sugilite.
Oh, cool.
They have been very popular, actually.
Oh, I look forward to being experienced enough to read them.
Yeah, it'll be a little while, though.
Yeah. But even the names, even that, well, not Stevonnie, who's a bit of a unique case, but the other fusions, all their names have been completely unique things. Like
yes.
Sugilite wasn't called Amethnet or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sugilite in the real world isn't what happens when you smush a garnet and amethyst together.
Right. I like that about it too, that it's not any kind of scientific thing where, like, if you wanted to know what would it be named if garnet and pearl did fuse, you couldn't like go look that up.
I mean, if they were representing colors rather than gemstones, you'd expect blue and yellow to fuse together to make green. And maybe if they fused with their red person, they'd make brown. Whereas here it's completely fresh, except for, well, possibly ironically, sometimes it's literal gem colors, but
yes. Yep.
Maybe that's why they ended the series when they were just starting to run out of gems and colors they could match up to each other.
Maybe, yeah. There's a theory for you. It's like, I guess Stevonnie is the first to be a fusion with one gem.
Yeah.
Just Stephen's. That's interesting.
And in the sense of fusion, this could be not because a gem, in terms of the actual rock, is powerful enough to just merge anyone, but because Stephen, and I keep going back to this, but Stephen is gem and human.
Right. He's
entirely gem and entirely human, and that means his entirety can fuse. Mm-hmm. And as gems can merge with their own kind, so Stephen, being a human, can fuse with his own kind, and possibly can fuse with a gem who is also his own kind.
Mm-hmm. That was the next big question at this point. Like, I have a friend who, because he's like a really big fan of the relationship between Stephen and Connie, was kind of hoping that it would be just a Stephen and Connie thing, that like it's not necessarily that Stephen can fuse in general, it's that he can fuse with her, and he was hoping that it would be isolated to that. So he was kind of voting against, or hoping against, him being able to fuse with gems because he wanted it to be a special Connie thing. But that was definitely the big question then. It's like, well, he can fuse, but can he fuse with gems?
And as is often the case, partly because of the nature of their storytelling or the short episodes, where you sort of don't know anything more from this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll guess that the next episode doesn't pick up with them lying on the floor and discussing what their fusion experience was like, because this show seldom goes to that sort of, well, seldom picks up right where it left off, but also seldom has a let's just talk in detail about some of the ramifications of the adventure we just had thing. Occasionally, but often it just sort of gets to the end of the main story part and stars out. And next week we've found a magical gem trumpet or something.
Magical gem trumpet. Oh, you are right. They do often just put things on the screen and then let us decide what they are.
And they've even either lampshaded it or written it into the show by saying Stephen doesn't ask follow-up questions. Because I'm sure there are many times when viewers have, including us, have been shouting at the screen, Stephen, ask more because we're really damn curious now.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that after they unfused, the first thing Stephen said was, we're back. There's a tie-in book talking about some of the facts and figures of the crystal gems. And Stephen is listing his powers and stuff. And one of them is, I can fuse. And, you know, he talks about being Stevonnie. And he said, it's kind of like you disappear, but you're still sort of there too, which is a really interesting way of saying it.
And I wonder if that's how everyone sees it or just him.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, just obviously as a Steven Universe fan, fusion is a hot button discussion topic. And so I've written some theories and stuff. I was kind of thinking like, almost like if it could be conceived of like a computer where you're taking parts from one and another and building another working entity. It's like, it's not running the software of either one of those computers' minds on the same hardware anymore. But if you were to put them back into their component bits, they would remember being that, but not as themselves. So it's like, I could go more into detail, but it's like, I was perceiving it sort of like a mixture of that versus maybe like mixing hot water and cold water, and you're going to get warm water, and it can do things that the hot water and the cold water can't do. But of course, you can't separate warm water into hot and cold again.
Yeah, I've been kind of working on the notion that for the most part, for example, Stephen and Connie would remember being Stevonnie, but Stephen would remember being Connie, and Connie would remember being Stephen.
Right. Yeah. They would obviously both have memories that they collected as Stevonnie, but it would sort of be like, oh, I remember being this other person almost, like that I was acting and being as part of this other entity. And he doesn't experience it as Stephen. So the memory of it's got to be kind of weird.
Yeah, and they've shown us, and this was another wise thing, metaphysically speaking, shown us that in universe, all fusions aren't the same. So what is true for one may not be true for another, which gives them a lot of storytelling to mess around with, and also means they don't accidentally sort of tie themselves down to a rule set that might not always work for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like, yeah, you're right. Because when Sugilite unfused, Garnet and Amethyst were like acting like they were exhausted, and they were like, Amethyst said she had a headache. And, but then when Opal unfused, it was like they were just yelling at each other.
Yeah. Opal, ironically, given how easily she fell apart, did actually seem to be one of the ones so far where you can most sort of follow the train of each one into the hole and then back out again.
Yeah. Opal, I guess, being the first fusion, it made sense that you could also sort of pick her apart the most, I guess. Like, just even physically, you can see like that is Pearl's nose and Amethyst's mouth. That is, the little curlies on the side of her head come from Pearl, and the long pale hair is Amethyst. It seemed a little bit more like, even though she was a whole as well, and some of her elements were unique, like the tunic she was wearing didn't really belong to either one of them, but she still seemed like, down to the personality and everything, it's like you could see where each piece came from more easily, I think, than the others.
And she had I guess it's a toss-up between her and Alexandrite, who had the most hair trigger. As soon as my components have a difference of opinion, I just poink apart.
Yeah. Amethyst and Pearl just fell apart right after Opal realized I don't have the heaven beetle. And whereas Alexandrite at least got to argue within herself for a few moments before she fell apart.
And again, without having read your essay, Sugilite was too stable for anyone's own good.
Please do not read my... Oh, goodness.
But there would have been countless opportunities for Garnet or Amethyst individuals to have opinions about that, but Sugilite had to be forced apart.
So, All right, so I have some thoughts about... So we were talking about the reactions that the gems had to Stevonnie coming back to the beach house. One thing I liked about Stevonnie coming back to the beach house is that it's a very Stevonnie thing to be like, I have to show everyone the cool thing.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so cute. Then they're like bursting in, like just standing there like, yeah, what do you think? And even if you didn't really know the gems all that well at that point, their reactions were so like on point for them.
Yeah, definitely.
But Pearl being sort of a little judgy and cautious, and Amethyst being the one to name them. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Coming up with something funny, and then they just adopt it because Garnet said it. But
it'd be very much Garnet in a nutshell. Now that I've said Stevonnie is Stevonnie's name, that is it from this point forward.
Right. And they even like say it to Kevin later, like, it's Stevonnie, I am not your baby. That was cool. But before that happened too, they each had kind of very characteristic reactions to Stephen not being able to fuse with any of them. And, Pearl kind of saying she was a little bit pessimistic, like, oh, I don't even know if he can do it. He's organic. And Amethyst is like, oh, who knows? It's Stephen. Like, it's really hard. She's kind of like supportive, and Garnet being all just like, well, I think Stephen can do it. And she's just like, oh, and when Amethyst says it's really hard even for us, and Garnet's like, not for me. Like, shut up, Garnet. You're amazing and you can do everything. Everything's easy for you.
Not for me. I'm good at everything.
Yes. She She's just like, and she doesn't even say it to brag. She's just like, it's a fact. I loved their dances too. When Garnet was dancing with Pearl, like they're going to demonstrate, and then they're doing this really just very, I don't know, very controlled dance at first. And then Garnet just throws Pearl against the wall. Oh my God, I lost it. And she liked it, you know.
I do like the kind of blush face, which got into a bit of a, hey, there are kids watching, you know.
And then Steven trying to emulate that was just so hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
Holding his hands against the wall on either side of Pearl. And she's just kind of looking at Garnet like,
Well, and, you know, he's not staring intensely into her knee.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. It was just so cute, them just trying to figure out how can we dance together. I really liked their attempts to encourage him and how, like, they each tried. Like, I'm just curious how that would have worked out if he had actually been successful at that point, like just suddenly fused with one of them in the living room.
Yeah, of note. In fact, this kind of goes down to the beach scene. Previous times we've seen the fusion process, each gem has sort of started with their own dance, then synced up with the other.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, they're sort of trying to get him to just copy along. And when he does successfully fuse, he's doing his own kind of dancing with Connie.
Right.
So that could be the missing element. They might not have quite tweaked onto that, or maybe he didn't quite develop his own style until he'd been through all that with the others.
Right. Now he's trying too hard to be like one of them and match them, but he's not really putting out anything for them to copy or to meet halfway on.
Yeah. And I suppose also none of, at least as far as we saw, because we just saw about a minute of montage, none of the other gems merged with each other in the process.
Right. I was wondering, like, during that scene when I first saw it with Garnet and Pearl, are they about to show him a successful one? Because also when they really have fused, when Pearl and Amethyst were attempting it in Giant Woman, and when we see the fusion dance for Sugilite, their gems are lit up. And we don't see that in the dance scene here.
Yeah, so, yeah, which does raise questions of, were they just trying to get him to focus and see if he triggered one on his own and then one of them might join in?
Right, like if his gem lit up, would they do theirs?
And to what extent do they have willpower over how and if they fuse when they are going through the motions like this?
Mm-hmm.
And do they like set off a general, I'm going to fuse thing, or do they specify who they're fusing with if there's more than one gem trying to fuse up nearby, as would be the case here? If they had started the motion, would, say, Garnet be able to think, oh, I only want to merge with Pearl, not Amethyst? Or is it, once everyone's in on the energy and syncing up, does it just sort of start to draw together?
Yeah. I mean, clearly it can be an accident since Steven had an accident, but a lot of his powers seem to manifest as accidents. So we don't know, like, could regular non-Steven gems fuse accidentally? It seems like they're implying that could not happen because Amethyst is like acting like it's really hard sometimes. And the first time we were ever exposed to fusion was Pearl and Amethyst struggling to do it and failing the first time we saw it.
Well, Steven, again, possibly he's the only one, or certainly the only one in hundreds of years who's actually been a developing child.
Yes.
So if they're fully formed as adults, if their youth is just too long ago for any of them to properly remember, it could be that one can do it accidentally when one's a child and one's powers are sort of flailing about, for want of a better word. But once you're at maturity, you forget, because you're so used to doing it on purpose, you no longer have that sort of childish lack of impulse control.
Yeah, it's probably somewhat similar to them talking about summoning weapons, actually, because like each of them had their own way of doing it, and they don't even really have to think about it anymore. So it's hard to tell Steven how to do it because they're all used to their own way.
Yeah, and again, if they're formed at full maturity and don't have to learn anything, then of course they don't have to learn anything. They've got no context for not being able to control when you do or don't do it.
Yeah, I'm still wondering about, in the first episode, Amethyst asking Steven, did Pearl tell you the pedal thing? Which implies there's a pedal thing that she knows about. And it just made me think, like, did she have to be trained on how to do it? Or, certainly with fusion, it doesn't always work. And Pearl blamed Amethyst for not syncing with her properly and stuff. So I don't know, but that's just a them thing, possibly.
Say, but on the other hand, of course she did.
But then we see Garnet with Amethyst forming Sugilite with no problem. Of course, again, that's Garnet. She's perfect at everything. She's amazing. I love her so much. I really loved her in this episode, that she was so encouraging and so positive about it.
Oh yeah. Well, if you're going with the trans coming out metaphors, the hatching metaphor, it would be like she was the experienced trans woman.
Mm-hmm. And she's just saying, I see you in me and me in you, and I know what you should be focusing on in this experience. Like, she's taking everything that she's experienced with fusion and saying, I want you to be this and have this.
And I guess the one experience you can't repeat, whether you're gem, human, or whatever else, is your first fusion.
Yes.
Whatever else we might know or not know about the gems, we know that they fused before we met them, and likely many times over. So this is her happy first fusion day. You'll never get this experience again, so make sure it's your best one.
Right, and everything that you build on your future experiences as a fusion would be building on this day. So make it a good experience.
And also thinking about it, given the post-war scenario we keep running up against, it's possible that none of them have seen a first fusion in peacetime, as it were, that can just go out and have fun and not get involved in the great off-screen cosmic war that we keep hearing bits about.
That's true.
She tells Stevonnie to go out and have fun. And the very idea that a new fusion can go out on their first day, their first fusion, and have fun might be so amazing to her that she encourages it so heavily.
Right. As I guess Alexandrite was the exception, but the other two, when we saw Opal and when we saw Sugilite, both of them kind of had a strength-based mission. Like, Opal had to beat the crap out of an enemy immediately, and Sugilite had to destroy a tower. And so you get the idea that they form fusions for purposes, and that they are probably, require their special fighting skills, their special weapons. Alexandrite just had to go to dinner, but that was a battle too. So.
Yeah. And all of them, well, they don't explicitly say of Alexandrite, but certainly the other two they had been formed before and probably happened in times of strife, even if not necessarily in the big conflict we keep seeing bits of, but maybe in one of their post-war battles or missions that since they've been on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah, you're right that it probably was very refreshing at the very least to see a fusion that's just like, I'm going to go to a dance party. I'm going to enjoy myself. So it is unfortunate, though, that, they probably remember it as a good experience, but there were some pretty confusing feelings and some negatives as well. So, but
if they do go into battle, they have the ready-made weapon set because Connie's getting some experience with Rose's sword, and of course Stephen can have Rose's shield.
There you go. So we have to hope that the skills will transfer to the fusion.
Yeah, it's slightly headcanonish after Lion 2, the movie, but that's in my head. Connie's kind of adopted Rose's sword.
Has adopted it? Yeah. Well, she was the one that seemed to know what to do with it. So
yeah, and at the end, she's still just hanging out, but she didn't go, oh dear, and stick it back in Lion's head.
Right. So I want to make sure that while we're talking about this episode, I want to make sure I don't forget to talk about like the actual interaction unfortunately, with Kevin. But one thing I want to bring up that you won't have the context for because you can't read fan reactions and stuff is that I saw a lot of people were very uncomfortable with that scene, not just because, they're getting hit on by somebody and they're clearly not interested and he's still pushing. But a lot of people who reacted to this had a negative reaction to it, not like, oh, Kevin, what a jerk. But this episode made me uncomfortable And I'm kind of mad that the crew wrote it this way because I felt so uncomfortable. Why did they make this so uncomfortable? And as you can imagine, this was a lot of the time it was men who reacted that way. And they're like, this is so messed up. This felt so creepy and gross. And some other people were saying, well, welcome to unwanted advances. You may never experience this if you're a cis man, because it's societally, a lot of times it's the man's job to be the aggressor in these situations. And it's not that they'll never experience unwanted advances, but it's like normatized as you're supposed to do this. And it's not weird if you do it. You're supposed to keep pushing until you get to yes. And it's not good for anybody, but it's more common that way. And because of the kind of first person experience that they give you sometimes with Stevonnie, that you're not even just seeing them on screen. Sometimes you're seeing what they're seeing, like Kevin coming through this bubble and looking you up and down. And it's like, ooh.
And we're seeing up close and personal that they, being Stevonnie, feel really uncomfortable and bad about this. They don't just go, oh, get off, go away.
Right. They're affected. Right. Absolutely. Like, especially since we just saw them kind of have a breakdown, like, oh, everybody's looking at me and I'm having this disco ball thing. And then Kevin comes through it and he's picking like the worst time to start hitting on them. And they're just kind of in a fog, like, huh, what's going on? And he's trying to mac.
The way it's quote unquote shot, at first it's like he's coming into the bubble to rescue them almost. And this is possibly how he sees it. But it becomes very clear that what he was doing was not rescuing, but intruding.
Yes. 100%. Yes. It's like the very first thing he says is, hey, baby. And you're just like, oh, I know who this is. I know what this is. Yuck.
Yeah. And yeah, so I can see how that would make people uncomfortable, whether they've experienced it or not, in different ways. In some ways, if you've had that, you're going, this is making me uncomfortable. It's taking me back to all the times it happened. Or you're going, I don't know what this is. This makes me feel uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar and negative.
Yeah.
Of course, some people might have experienced it and just go, this again.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people who went ahead and analyzed this on the level of like, okay, this is sort of a gendered phenomenon where Kevin is seeing Stevonnie as a girl. Like he calls them girl at one point, like, and says, hey, baby, which is like, it's a very like hit on a girl at a club kind of thing that a dude like that would say. And I think a lot of the people who went kind of into detail to analyze this were saying, I related to that and I felt the same disgust. And I don't like when people talk to me like that. And I especially don't like when people ignore my no or pursue me when I leave.
That's what really pushed it, that Stevonnie was definitely declining him unquestionably. And he just pressed on that she didn't. Oh, damn. Now I've been infected by the story of people calling them she. Yeah. They didn't. And possibly also because we're talking about gendered behavior. So that's a bit sad.
Exactly. Because he's seeing Stevonnie as in this, like leaning against the wall and like doing that whole I'm trapping you in thing. It's very gross. Ugh.
Yeah. He doesn't say, oh, this quote unquote girl looks uncomfortable. And as I said, he just presses on. He doesn't leave, which would be the best thing to do.
The decent thing.
He doesn't try to address the discomfort, which would probably go badly, but at least show his heart was in the right place.
Read the room, guy.
I mean, I'm sure we've all had the experience of trying to help someone, not realizing the best way to help is to leave, but it didn't happen either way here. He just kept on and basically did not care about their feelings.
Well, yep, 100%. And you know what? I even got this feeling like you, I mean, I hadn't quite perceived it as him coming into the bubble to rescue them. But once you said that, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly kind of what he was doing. But the second instance of this kind of backs that up even more is when like they're like, oh, I don't want to dance anymore. And he says, come back out with me. If you're so lonely, then why don't you dance with me? Like he perceives himself as like, I'm solving a problem. What, you said you were lonely. Here I am. Why wouldn't you want me? I mean, obviously, if you don't want to be alone, you want to be with me. Come on. Yeah, just logic.
Yeah. And it is a sort of, well, to say it's MRA logic is possibly stronger than they were going for. But it comes from the same school of I'm going to try to logic this out with myself still at the center, which, you know, we've all sadly read things. So how can women say they don't want X and yet they Y, sort of thing?
Yep. Yeah. How can you want to be, how can you complain about being lonely and then still not say yes to dancing with me? I mean, it couldn't possibly be me. It couldn't possibly be my approach. You don't want to be alone, so here I am.
Yeah. And somehow the logical solution I've reached is that you give me what I want.
Yes. Well said. You know, and the attempt to cast them in a different category from everyone else in the club, like, we're angels walking among garbage people, is what he says. Like, oh, I'm supposed to bond with you over how superior we clearly are as a couple. We're perfect for each other.
Yeah, I was thinking, I can see some garbage people here, mate, but
I mean, well,
it ain't the other dancers.
Ronaldo is over there doing this.
Hey, but this time round, Ronaldo's pretty harmless. He's just doing some horrid dancing.
Yes. And Kevin looks at him and goes, yeesh. I mean, but just leave him alone. Let him do his thing. I bet he blogged about it, actually. I think he did.
There we go.
Oh, you know what? I didn't go double check and look at the blog, but what I remember from this episode is that Ronaldo did blog about seeing Stevonnie unfuse. And he had an Illuminati related reason for why they were in like a very nice looking suit of some kind. I forget exactly what he said, but he said that before that happened, he had been planning to ask them to dance. It's very funny. So, Kevin, yuck.
Yeah. Well, and Kevin being, granted, I don't know if he's been in a background maybe before, but he's a new character, really. So they're not casting one of our beloved or even less than beloved hilarious scamps of the townfolk into this role.
Right. He's kind of an interloper who has come in and judged everyone around him, and only Stevonnie is worthy of his attention. And
in some ways, because of the way this happens in real world scenarios, to many of us a lot, he actually seems like worse a person than Ronaldo, who has kidnapped a child, or than Onion, who is a one boy-shaped-ish streak of destruction. Of course, it may be folly to put any kind of human morals onto Onion, but still, Kevin seems worse than any of the beings we've seen do actual bad things. Yeah. Because most of the bad things on this show are cartoonish. I mean, sadly, people do kidnap children in real life, but very seldom is it dressed up in snake nursing suits.
Right, and you can forgive a guy for tying you up and hitting you with a potato, right?
Yeah. So that sort of thing's all ludicrous, but this is, I mean, basically this is real until defusion happens.
Yeah, that's a good distinction too, because this is a type of trash human that any of us could have run into in a club or anywhere. And it feels very personal in some ways. So, you know, it is true that fan reactions, people hate Kevin more than they hate villains, you know? So, yeah. And, you know, it's very, it's indisputable that he ignored their consent. Like, he was pushing, which is like it's uncomplicated as far as that was a bad thing to do. Nobody's like on his side, except for, like you said, maybe MRAs or like he should be doing that because that's his role as a man.
Yeah. And their consent was pretty explicit.
Oh yeah.
You can't sit back and go, oh, I see how he could have misunderstood that.
Right. Right. Maybe at the very beginning, if they're standing there on the dance floor, shell shocked, and he feels like, oh, that's a person that needs rescue by me, and they're really hot and they just danced really awesome. So I'm going to dance really awesome and impress them.
Well, I think at that point, that's where you see the difference between I should rescue them because I'm great, or I should rescue them because they seem to be in trouble.
Right. Yeah. The panic attack representation was pretty cool. The disco ball bubble kind of thing. And like you said, wasn't clear as to like, is something actually happening, or is this like an illusion? Is this a hallucination? What is this?
And they don't explicitly say, which I'm glad of, because then it can kind of work both ways.
Yes.
I thought it was a very effective metaphor, but you could make the case that this is Steven's bubble power playing up, and it looks different because of the fusion or of the situation they're in, and the panic attacks make it not work properly, and that's why Kevin can just stroll in.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of consent issues, I did notice, just backing up a little bit, there was that bit where they're kind of talking to themselves, or Steven and Connie are kind of having a conversation inside of Stevonnie where they had the donuts and they're just kind of like holding them together and pulling them apart, like having this conversation, like, are you okay? We can stop if you want. Like, I really liked that because it was sort of like checking in, like a continuous consent metaphor.
Yes, definitely.
Are you okay with continuing this? Or, let me get your explicit agreement to continue because this could be weird.
And also very much worked with the scenario because it wasn't made 100% clear if either half was talking to which half.
Mm-hmm. Some people have decided, yes, it's this person talking and this person talking, but I did actually find it to be hard to tell sometimes. And I think that was intentional. I felt like it could have been shades of both of them at almost any time.
Yeah, well, I think that was made pretty explicit with the shoe thing. And I think we did keep coming back to that. The shoe thing made it clear because, I went into that before. Mm-hmm. And if a fusion is indeed a whole being in its own right, then this could not be Steven talking to Connie or Connie talking to Steven, but Stevonnie's doubts talking to Stevonnie's confidence.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think probably there are opportunities, like kind of before they fall apart and feel too differently about something, that they probably can sort of have conversations inside, just given what we saw with Alexandrite. Kind of, we started to hear their voices come out. But then they did fall apart very shortly afterwards. So just, it seems like all conversations that come from one person or the other would have to still be the fusion in a way. At the same time, paradoxically.
Yeah. Well, Alexandrite started talking in the 3 different voices, and that was immediately before she disassembled too.
Yeah, just cracks down the face and everything.
Whereas Stevonnie was calmly talking to themselves in Stevonnie's own voice. And another thing about that ongoing consent thing is that means, because if they'd said it's time to stop now, it would have made us, the viewer, possibly feel a bit awkward about what had come before. Be like, was one or both of them uncomfortable for all this and it was just covered up with shallow enthusiasm? Whereas saying, no, I'm still into this, this is cool. Right. Being reticent is one thing, but I don't want to actually stop. That's okay, which means you're still positive about what comes before and you're still feeling positive until something else comes along to start messing things up.
Yeah. And it seems like, they enjoyed going into the donut shop and bamboozling Sadie and Lars, and then they have donuts and they're excited. But it seemed like they kind of decided to do that check-in based on like, okay, one for me and one for me. It's sort of this, I'm alone and that's weird because we're together, but I'm alone and what's going on? Kind of this confusion just over the whole process. And that's similar to what happened when Stevonnie was confused, feeling alone outside at the dance thing. It's like, it's got to be just a little overwhelming and confusing, I guess. So they're just making sure they want to continue. Because also, I think, Steven wants so badly to be able to do what the gems value and be a full crystal gem and do everything they can do. So he's excited about being able to do it. And then Connie has expressed, like, in the last Lion episode, she was like, I don't understand why you hang out with me. I'm so much less interesting than you. And she enjoys the idea of being part of that magic, I think. So they've found a combination. I love it.
Yeah, sure. I'm definitely looking forward to where we keep going with Stevonnie. Much like I theorized or hypothesized Garnet was thinking, we'll never get that first experience again, but still want to see them grow as a person who is people. Yeah.
And it would be interesting to see, like, I guess it wouldn't be possible for them to have like a different, like, fused weapon because they only have Steven's shield. So
I think much as I think Connie's adopted the sword, I think she still has to carry it around the old fashioned way.
Right. It wouldn't be like you could summon it except from Lion. But the fact that we saw them kind of do a really amazing dance made me feel like, okay, that was almost like it was a superpower, but it was a very human superpower. You know what I mean? Like, they're like fantastic dancer. I like that. It's cool.
And of course ties in with the dancing thing that's been going all through the episode and all through every fusion appearance thus far.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's just cool that, that they're just kind of enjoying having a different body and being able to do things that they can't do alone in front of people.
And being so tall, probably.
Yes. I thought that was neat. They're suddenly almost as tall as Garnet. God. Wow. No wonder people were like, whoa, look at that.
Only the 2 arms and eyes this time. I did notice that.
Yeah. You know what? That actually kind of goes into something that I wanted to share with you regarding Rebecca Sugar kind of talking about this episode, that she said that one of the things that inspired her to write about this is Stevonnie kind of comes across as a representation of when you're first growing up, it's kind of an adolescence thing where suddenly, even though you're still just you, people are responding to you differently. And it's almost like you have a new power over people that you never had before, which is uncomfortable a little bit because you're still just you. And it was kind of an exploration of that. Like suddenly people are looking at you different. People that didn't know you before are responding to you very differently than they used to. And that she wanted to make almost like a metaphor for that with Stevonnie's first romp around. So now I'm trying to remember what you said that made me want to say that. Oh,
the number thereof.
Right. So the reason that I thought of that when you said that is I think it would have been harder to have that be sort of an adolescence metaphor if it was also possible they were getting stared at because they had extra body parts.
Well, yeah. I mean, even the donut scene, they would have, are they smitten with them? Or is it because they have 4 arms and 4 eyes?
Right. And you know what? Like, I mean, as uncomfortable as it is, I've unfortunately run into a bunch of like speculation on like what genitals might Stevonnie have. And I'm like, that is that is number one, completely not your business. And number 2, the preoccupation with people thinking like, I need to know and I deserve to know what's in your pants is another way this kind of connects back to the trans metaphor. Yeah. And I appreciate that they're not addressing that. They're like, well, why are you wondering what's in this person's pants?
Yeah. And 3, this is a cartoon. No one has genitals.
That's right, pretty much. So it's, I guess, a sort of outside of the context of the show thing, but they were, in a couple of different contexts, confirmed to be both non-binary and intersex character. So that is nice.
Cool.
But, then people were reacting to that like, well, what does that mean about, I have to know these things about anatomy. And I'm like, you don't know anything if somebody says that they're intersex. There's nothing that is specified by that. So again, the whole not answering that for you is an example you should follow with real people in your life who may use that same designation.
This isn't a show where genitals matter. If this was some other shows, that would be appropriate speculation because everyone's genitals might be getting in on it. If this was Sex and the City or something, then that would simply be par for the course. But it is not. This is all about feelings and adventures. And just to sort of illustrate how this thing should work in appropriate things, my closest intersex friend, I know nothing about their genitalia to the point I don't even know what their assigned gender at birth is, which it is not mine to know, but I am not seeking to know. I don't feel this is something this person owes me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I actually, by this point in our relationship, I have a feeling they think I know and just don't mention it, but I literally don't know.
Right. Yeah. I guess the closest person that I am friends with who is intersex, like I only know because she was on like some TV shows and stuff kind of talking about the particular type of syndrome that she has. And, because of the nature of the syndrome, what their assigned gender is if they have this. But, it's like also still none of my business if I didn't, see it on TV. It's not something that I've discussed directly with her.
Yeah. If it's something the person wants to discuss with you and maybe even likes talking about, that's fine.
Right.
But not everyone goes there. Most people don't.
Exactly. Yeah. And, like, not to make this too much of an extended kind of metaphor, but one of my closest friends who was disabled, he used a wheelchair. And like, I never asked him what kind of syndrome or problem did you ever have that causes you to have to use this, and the thing that surprised me was that other people asked me about him and like, well, why does he use a chair? I'm like, I don't know. I never asked him. Like, why didn't you ever ask him? I'm like, I just figured if maybe eventually it would come up, but if it doesn't, I don't care. Like, I don't need to know that. And
maybe one day they'll want to talk about it. Maybe one day it will become relevant, but thus far, no. Right. And in fact, just to tag onto that, because this one's actually slightly amusing, I also have a friend who used a wheelchair and I didn't know why. I knew they had a particular condition, which often results in someone using a wheelchair. But no, their version of that condition doesn't affect them in that way. I would later find it's a completely different condition they also have. So it's a bit, this is what happens if you depend on perception and stereotypes.
Right. The thing that really just struck me is how many people were shocked that I had never asked. And so they're like, well, how come you're tiptoeing around this or whatever? But I just, I acknowledge that I didn't know the answer to the question. And, maybe I would realize, okay, this person uses a chair and most people don't. But it's not that my mind completely doesn't go there. It's that I'm not preoccupied with it. It's not important. It's the same reason I've never asked most of the people I know how many sexual partners they've had or how many haircuts they've had. It's like, okay, maybe it's interesting, but I never really felt like asking.
Yeah, it's like the aforementioned friend, the first condition that was because that was one she was an advocate for raising awareness for. So her experience with it came up a lot. And that was fair game for talking about because usually she was the one raising it. The other condition wasn't one that she worked on that in that way. And it's more or less a you've got it or you don't and this happens sort of condition. It can affect you, but it's not a deep mystery condition that they still need loads of research into. Hence, that had never come up.
It really is just kind of a broad issue where if your body is not absolutely typical in some way, people feel like they are entitled to information about it and that you shouldn't have mentioned being part of this group if you don't want to talk about really private things about your body. And that's not the way it is. And I think that even though this show doesn't specifically talk about this is Stevonnie's situation and this is why you should never ask what's in their pants, it's just kind of, it's how you should, like I said, it's how you should treat real people in your life who might be in a similar situation.
Yeah. Stevonnie is not a being it's going to become relevant to any of us watching or possibly even to any people in universe, what is in their pants or what it can and can't do.
Right. Yeah. So.
I mean, jumping back, there are probably all kinds of questions as to how Rose would birth Steven, but they're probably keeping all that off screen.
Yeah. There's been no, except for seeing that Rose was pregnant at some point. So apparently she had the anatomy to do so, or at least had the appearance of having the anatomy to do so. We still don't know the details of the birth. And when you start to ask those questions, you start to realize you're asking some pretty in-depth genital questions about a cartoon. And actually, it's like, all right, that's cool.
Until this point, and it's still not impossible, references to her giving up her physical form, I sort of just imagined her disappearing in a glow surrounding her gem, and then when the glow fades, there's little Steven with the gem instead.
Yeah, we don't know how much of actual birth she even could experience because theoretically, I guess they both, either she handed her gem off at some point or they both were sharing the gem while she was pregnant. So I don't know. It's pretty weird.
Yeah.
Don't know how it works.
I'd be surprised if they go into that much detail. Again, kids show, and also they like to leave some questions up in the air.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that especially also, again, some of what Rose did to have a baby had to be more intentional than what humans do. Just kind of happens. But if, a lot of people who have given birth have no idea what happened to their body. They don't really know the details. So it's possible that Rose didn't really know. Yeah. She was just kind of copying and it happened and nobody really could have told you.
Granted, I did just get the mental image of Rose researching the process with actual books and things, like leaving one on the table and and going out, then Pearl comes along, takes one look and just sort of puts it back down wide-eyed and deciding never to look at it again.
Probably. Oh, goodness. On the one hand, it seems like it could be a pretty involved process to figure out how to duplicate anatomy that you're not familiar with. But then on the other hand, apparently Amethyst has managed to duplicate a digestive system, at least partially, and I can't imagine her studying it. So it's probably just something she does.
Yeah, well, I have wondered, and this is broader, and we will come back to this episode in a moment, Pete, but in a broader sense, if gem shapeshifting is sort of manual, if you will, if, say, Amethyst, when she turns into a cat, has to think, okay, shrink my body, make the ears go to the top, grow something fur-like, or she just thinks, I want to be a cat, and then she's a cat. Mm-hmm. Which would, for duplicating anatomy, that would be, a very key difference if you just read a book and go, need some of that, bang.
Right. It's kind of like, we've talked about animorphs on this channel before, that the animorphs way of turning into an animal is just copying their DNA, and then they just basically turn it on and they turn into the thing without really intentionally guiding the process. It would be cool if, Rose decided, I'm going to have a baby and I'm going to make these parts and they'll make a baby, sort of.
And, Amethyst turns into dog copters. So either she's very good at sculpting, or there's some kind of, you can just sort of drop in a directive and go for it.
Yeah. But then we're just kind of back to, it's all drawn by animators anyway. So the thing they wanted to happen, so it happened.
They're listening to this going, I don't know, she turns into a dog for copter on its back. What, why is that not the question and the answer?
Yeah, so there's a book, I've mentioned it before, called Guide to the Crystal Gems, and they have a few places where there's surprising information in there. Like earlier in this episode, I mentioned that Steven said that fusing feels like disappearing, but you're still sort of there. In that same book, there were a couple of references to how Rose did it. And I think I've mentioned before that she was said to have wanted to experience the process of birth. And so she duplicated what a human would have to do that. Where with this episode, where you have Steven did not mean to fuse with Connie, but it still happened, and they made a functional human body, which we don't know how that works. They weren't hiding the extra eyes and limbs and stuff inside somewhere. So
they didn't have to get a pair of garnet shades or anything.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen people actually discuss that, like, why don't they have any duplicated parts? And one of the things that I jokingly suggested is, I think they just have a whole lot of extra hair. Big, huge hair.
Yeah. Or, I mean, they are quite taller than either their components. I mean, what if Stevonnie's legs are made of both Connie's and Steven's legs?
Yeah.
And the arms, which would probably be what I was supposed to be talking about. Mm-hmm. You get a long set of arms by combining two short sets of arms.
Yeah, there you go. Oh.
But even looking at Garnet's eyes shows me that there is obviously some variation in anatomy, because if I'm right and she's a fusion, then she should have 4 eyes. If I'm not right and she's simply a single being, she should have 2 eyes. She has 3.
Yeah.
So obviously gems can come with variable amounts of various kinds of anatomies.
Yeah. I think so far we just have such a limited pool to decide what's normal that I guess you can't really draw any conclusions. But I'm trying to think, like, with stuff like Opal having 4 arms and 2 eyes.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So
that points back to...
She was kind of the precedent of what we should expect from seeing fusions. And so then every fusion that we've seen since then is different from that in some way. And so far they're just really messing with us.
Yeah. So I noticed that they had only the average number of parts, but I didn't think, this is totally inconsistent.
Right. So yeah. But then we have a Sugalite with a whole, like, spider's mess of eyes and also 4 arms. So and Stevonnie doesn't have 4 arms.
Well, I guess this is how their fusion works.
You know what would have been funny is if Stevonnie had extra fingers.
I was literally just thinking that.
I think we're the same person sometimes.
That would have been a cute, if subtle way to do it too.
What would? Oh.
Just having the extra fingers, and even if they didn't actually call attention to it in dialogue, just whenever you caught their extra fingers, their hands, you go, oh, neat.
That would have been cool. Unfortunately, we can also see their toes, so we know they don't have extra toes either.
No.
So I like their design. I like the way that the clothes overlapped too. It looked like Steven's little jeans became short shorts.
Yeah.
Kind of doesn't totally make sense, but it works. It works fine.
Yeah. Well, Connie's entire dress became a crop top. So
yeah, and that's obviously, if that dress was that short, then it would not have covered much for Connie. So something weird is going on with the clothes. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the fusion process has some kind of cosmic sense of appropriateness.
Yeah. I have done a Stevonnie cosplay.
Oh, cool.
I just headcanoned that they would be able to play the ukulele because Steven can. So I carried my ukulele around and took song requests at conventions. That was my first Steven Universe cosplay at a convention, doing Stevonnie.
Awesome.
It was fun too, because it's comfortable. It's a very comfortable costume. The most uncomfortable part of it is the wig, unfortunately.
That'd be quite a lot of wig.
Yeah, I'm not blessed with huge black hair, but I have quite a lot of my own hair, so it's not great to stuff all of that under a wig.
No.
It's a lot. But I had a good time doing that, and I've done it several times since. I really enjoy doing Stevonnie cosplay. It's just that I'm also very tiny, so I make a mini Stevonnie. Oh, well. Yeah, I took my Steven ukulele around and played some songs. Good time.
That sounds fun.
It was. I guess, speaking of music, there was some more background music in this one that we didn't have a proper song, but we had the fusion disco at the beginning.
Another time when you can imagine them having a song to put in, but they didn't.
Yeah.
I could easily conceive of someone coming up with some kind of "Isn't It Great to Be Fused Together" as Stevonnie song.
I think it would have been too much feeling and I would have passed out.
I think also it might have shifted the tone enough to derail some of the other feeling.
Might be right. It might have become a little too explicit. And I liked kind of just seeing what the experience was without seeing it necessarily translated into music.
And also sometimes good as a song is and good as a scene is, they just don't need to be stuck together.
It's true. Steven's cute little song on his music player that he played while they were dancing was called Alone Together, I believe. They got a special song for when they were running, which was called Twilight Run. And then there was a club song that I believe was called Be Cool at the Club. So that was the weird little Game Boy rave that Sour Cream had going on. Oh, I do have another thing that I planned to ask you before we even started watching this for a probing question.
Follow-up questions!
Are you ready for it?
Oh, yes. You alluded to how you've been cooking up this one.
Yes. Well, it's kind of a two-parter. I'm going to ask, do you think that Steven's next fusion would be with a human or a gem next? And also, would Stevonnie be able to fuse?
Well, going backwards, thus far, we've seen, and I think we chatted about it briefly, we've seen a three-way fusion, but we don't know that it was a compound fusion. So we don't know if they just went all three together or then two become one and then that one become one with the other one. So part of the answer lies in there. I think Stevonnie possibly could fuse, relating on how fusion components seem to complement and sometimes amplify each other. And again, back to my recent thoughts about Steven not being half and half, but all of both. So I can see it fitting that Stevonnie may be able to fuse again. Whether that would be fusing up another human or a gem might be a question in and of itself. The only question I have over that is that Steven fused with someone he was very emotionally in sync and close to. Stevonnie as a whole doesn't really have anyone like that, at least not as yet. So whether one part of them, one member of them was like that would do the trick, I don't know. And we're still on to, they only know so many people, both in singular and plural they in that sense.
Right. And like when sour cream came along, they had to pretend like they didn't even know him, even though like Steven clearly recognizes sour cream. And I guess Connie is unfamiliar with sour cream. So it's kind of like, it's like, oh, I recognize you, but I don't. So yeah, you're right. They don't have any relationships as such. As
for whether his next fusion would be a human or a gem, it would make sense for him to try a gem next, because he hasn't tried it with a gem yet. And it is 3 definite all the way gems who have been teaching him about fusion. So the next educational step would be to maybe take what he learned as Stevonnie and the fusion there and apply it to the learning he's been getting with the other 3 so far.
Mm-hmm. It's reasonable.
And in terms of people he'd be emotionally close enough to, that probably leaves the 3 of them and his dad anyway. So if nothing else, the numbers would suggest a gem more probable.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I know even like kind of this early on, people were saying, after it became obvious that he can fuse with humans, they're like, we got to have Steven fuse with Lars because the name is Stars.
That's much better than the Grieven that was cooking up in my head.
Greg?
Yeah, Greg and Steven.
No. Okay. Yeah. I know, the concept of Steven possibly fusing coming up in Giant Woman, people were kind of waiting for it. And I think most people were assuming it would be one of the gems because, human fusions were not on the table. But once human fusions were on the table, everybody's just like, who can we fuse Steven with? Let's fuse him with everyone.
And that way they kind of subvert our expectations, because basically the 3 people you're guessing about, it's none of them.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting if it was like some of them, like not just one, but like a multiple.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering, is there a max limit for how many you can fuse before it just becomes untenable?
Oh.
Or you start running out of things to call the fusion?
Yeah. Oh.
I tried to think of a gem that was multiple colors, and the first one that came to mind was opal, but they've used that.
Yeah. Alexandrite is another good one. I'm thinking of some others, but a lot of them are artificial.
I guess we don't quite know how the rules apply. We've explored before and ultimately not had an answer as to how these actually relate to the actual real-world gemstones at all.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like we still don't even know like if pearl is affiliated with water or clams or whatever.
Yeah. Or if it's more a case of the closest equivalent to, because it's round and shiny and smooth and white, that's a pearl.
Mm-hmm. Really does go with who she is very well. The concept of it.
So we get into a gem speaking English thing.
Yeah. So I regret to inform you that I did not make a food for this episode.
Was there a food to be? Oh, there was 2 donuts.
Just donuts.
Fairly straightforward, though. It's one donut and another donut.
So far, I have not come to an episode where I felt like I needed to make donuts because they were just store-bought donuts. And Sadie has told us that they're shipped in from a corporate bake station. So I was just not making my own donuts.
The most you could do would get a round one and a whole one and just kind of pump them together like Stevonnie did.
Yeah. True. But I have a reason. It seems weird to me that I have not acted that out or anything since I'm such a weirdo with all the food. I think I don't have much else to tell you about besides a few factoids and my merchandise.
Let's go factoiding.
If only I had known that.
Okay. Did you happen to notice that Rebecca Sugar was on the title card again?
I thought I caught the name. I got this thing where I sort of remember to look at the credit only as soon as the next one comes up.
Mm-hmm. So this one had Hillary Florido, Katie Mitroff, and Rebecca again. So we had 2 Rebecca episodes in a row.
And she left us a blubbering mess.
That's just too much. Like, Rebecca, give us a break for a bit. Yeah, but I really liked that the combination of those three together, that they all did a really good job on making this first experience for them a really good first experience for us. Hillary and Katie first worked together on Secret Team. So that was cool. And I like that one. And I don't think we've seen one of their episodes since, have we? Nope. Brain running through stuff. Nope. This was their next episode. And the crystal gems try to teach Steven to use his fusion powers is the tagline.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That'd probably be spoilerish if you were looking at it from way back at the start. But by this point, I think we've enough behind us to know that that's a thing that could happen without giving away what actually happens.
Yes. And I feel like it just as easily could have been like he tries and he can't do it kind of thing. A lot like an indirect kiss was, but he did finally at the end figure out that he had healing powers.
Yeah. And I mean, up in the air whether it was the gems tutelage that actually got him to fuse.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess he had it on his brain at the time and confessing to Connie that he was just so conflicted about it and trying to figure out if he could do it. So.
Maybe going way back to the way the different gems talked about different ways of summoning their weapons, they have different ways of thinking about fusing too, and he has to not think about it too hard.
Yeah. And the connection seems to be the most important part for any of them. So, you know, if he's trying to forge a connection with them by copying them, it's probably not enough of him, like you were saying.
And maybe if, especially this early in his experience, if he's just thinking, gonna fuse, it's not going to work.
That's a good point, because I'm sure, just like the rest of us, we didn't think when he starts dancing with Connie that that's going to happen. You know, maybe some of us thought, oh, they're going to fuse, but those of us who know it's a cartoon and things could happen. Whereas if you're a human, you probably don't think that your weird gem friend is going to fuse with you. So neither of them were sitting there thinking, this is why we're doing this. We're just dancing to dance.
Yeah. And in fact, his dancing with Connie was much more natural movement than when he was trying to mimic the other gems.
Yeah. He was trying so hard to do what they did and just get the steps right. And
whereas dancing with Connie, he just danced.
It was so cute. I know I said that before, but I just loved how they took each other's hands and trusted and just enjoyed it and acted a little goofy, running around, ran into each other, fell down a little, and Connie caught him. So cute, so sweet. And you could just see that they really had a connection that they then celebrated. It's very sweet and cute. Factoids continuing. Some people have said that when Steven was being teased by Lars in the pilot, that he was giving him crap about, like, you're not exactly a hot girl, Steven. Yeah, well, if I was, I wouldn't be talking to you. And some people had made a joke about, like, oh, well, just wait, like 36 episodes from now, Lars, maybe he will be a hot girl. Not exactly a girl, but, and I don't think I've really seen anybody say this, but well, maybe I have, where he's singing about in Giant Woman. He's like, but if it were me, I'd really want to be a giant woman. Maybe one day you'll get to be Steven.
Yeah. Or close to, anyway. Closer to.
Yeah. Somewhat more giant, somewhat closer to a woman than you are, but still not. It's very funny. So some people think that's a reference. Other people just say, what else? Voice actors. Stevonnie.
I kept wondering that and kept forgetting to ask.
Yay. Stevonnie is voiced by AJ Mishaka. And yeah, she's, I think she was a model first, but is mostly kind of known for being a musician with her sister, Allie. AJ stands for Amanda Joy, I think. But she goes by AJ. And they had a band, which I think is just called AJ and Allie. And
Amanda Joy sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Did she do any work just as like Amanda Joy?
I don't know. I think just AJ and Allie was the name of their band. And I don't know what else that she has done. I'm not all that familiar with her work. I just knew, okay, she's done some voiceover work. She's done some singer-songwriter, musician stuff. When she talks about her work, she mostly talks about performing as a musician rather than as a voice actor. But now she's done several roles. So
the names sound very familiar, but I'm not placing them. So it is possible I've encountered them along the way.
Okay. And there's also new voice actor on the scene for freaking Kevin. It's a fella named Andrew Cascino, who I think is mostly just a voice actor. That he's known for that. He's done a bunch of stuff, commercial and cartoons and stuff like that. So
now people throw things at him in the street because he was Kevin.
He does a really good job being a smarmy jerk. Seem to really embrace it. And some of the people who were other dancers, other partiers at that rave were designed as sort of background characters based on Crooniverse people. So they kind of drew themselves into the episode. But a lot of them, I don't know who they are. Like some of them I know who they are, and some of them I'm like, I don't know who that's supposed to be.
I mean, I saw a few familiar character faces, like Ronaldo was there and Jenny Pizza.
Jenny was there, yeah. I think, and of course, Sour Cream. And was Buck there? I think Buck was there. Was he?
I didn't catch him, but I was looking at the main events for the most part then.
Yeah. There's one person there that I still don't know who on the crew he might be, but actually I don't even know if it's a he, but it's drawn with a very typical sort of bulky, sort of masculine thing. And the character always has a mushroom on their shirt and is bald, I think. And this is the most supportive fan. This person was in the audience at Tiger Millionaire. This person is in every crowd scene. And I'm like, this person goes to everything. I love this character because like you can tell, okay, they're living their best life, just supporting their friends all the time. Just whoa, all the time. I love my mushroom shirt character.
Yeah. They just so love being a part of the community.
Yeah. So I wonder if that is a specific person, because I still haven't tracked that. I haven't tracked the character down to whether it's a background person, whether it's artist, whether it's a border or a background art person. I have no idea. So maybe I'll never know. But there are definitely some people that I know what the artists look like. The one that looks like Ian Jones-Cordy is in a lot of crowd scenes too. I think he was there. Pretty sure, almost sure he was there. So I think the only thing I can think of that counts as a factoid from here is just obvious from context is that this is the first episode that was not explicitly entirely in Steven's perspective. It was partially in Stevonnie's. So hooray. Broke the pattern a bit.
Fits with how we said they work. That perspective merges, then re-separates to the main.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We usually don't, like, even with Steven's perspective, I think there have been a few times where we get like a first person perspective, but with the Stevonnie thing, there were several things where we just cut into this is what they're seeing rather than us seeing them seeing it. So very effective. Very gets your attention.
Yeah. Also made a bit ambiguous. Are they speaking or thinking this, which made it a bit more intimate? Well, even more intimate because we're already seeing as if we were literally inside their head.
A little trippy to be like, why is that shoe so small? What's going on?
I mean, it is weird the time Stephen actually has an internal monologue. It doesn't just say everything out loud.
Yeah.
I didn't mention it, but I saw that a bit in Lion 3 straight to video, that he's thinking when he's in the field, the pocket dimension, and most of his thoughts just come out of his mouth.
Right. When he's thinking in there and he can't breathe, there's sort of this echo to it. Very weird. Yeah. I think during the scene where Stevonnie is having the internal dialogue about, are you okay? We can stop kind of thing. It seemed like I wasn't sure if that was being spoken. So could have been.
Yeah. I think the ambiguity works.
Oh, absolutely. I really like when they go ambiguous with this and you get the feeling that if you interpret it this way or you interpret it that way, both are okay for the most part.
Because there was no one else there, so no one was going to say, why are you talking to yourself?
Right. Speaking of which, there were a couple of places where Stevonnie said I and other times when they said we or us. When, like Kevin was saying, like, don't get crazy. And they're like, how can you say that? You don't even know us. So
I liked that. I felt it was natural rather than inconsistent.
Absolutely. I love it.
Definitely part of the you're not one people, you're not two people, because I think the flip side to that is you are one people, you are two people.
Right. It's really not either of those things. It's all something that we don't really have a direct analogy for, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I like that it's its own thing to such a really oddly relatable extent. You can find parts of it that you relate to and parts of it that you couldn't, but still feel like it's a valuable thing to see.
Brand spanking new, mint in box.
You want to see my merchandise?
I would like to see your merchandise.
Did you already see it?
I don't know. Did I?
I don't think so, but I switched my shirt around.
Oh,
This is a Stevonnie t-shirt with Steven and Connie on it.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's kind of weird because that shouldn't exist, but it's neat. So
I like that. No, I didn't see it because the image was still below camera, and I guess you switched it while I was away, or you were camera off.
I turned it around while you were watching the episode.
Sneaky.
I was wearing my shirt backwards, everyone. And then I turned it around because it had a spoiler on it. I did not.
Up until now, you've mostly been close enough to the camera that I haven't seen what was on it.
Yes, I had to back up so that you could see Stevonnie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you say, it's literally impossible, but it's a great figurative image.
Yes. And actually last week I had to adjust my camera because I said there's a spoiler in the background. It's my calendar has Stevonnie running. You can probably vaguely see it on my Steven Universe calendar.
I can see it, but to be honest, even though I know what it is, I can't tell what it is.
I'm glad that you can't, because you would have spoiled last week because I had switched my calendar and not realized, oh crap, it's in May and it has Stevonnie and you're not supposed to see Stevonnie yet. So I have to be careful not to spoil you with my background stuff because there's always so much cartoon stuff. Every once in a while I could be drinking out of the wrong mug and spoil you. It'd be terrible. But worst case, that is probably a spoiler, but I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for the most part, much behind you is fuzzed out enough. I can't tell what it is without being led.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way. It is what it is. So had you had any inkling that this episode would lead to this today? Because I was just wondering if because you had mentioned seeing universe stuff before and not having context for it. So I wondered if you knew or suspected that Stevonnie existed.
Not that I know of. I think if I ever saw them, it was so contextless it fell straight back out again.
Right. Like, at what point are you ever going to see a character and be like, that's probably a fusion?
Well, yeah. I would,
right.
Probably whenever I saw them, I probably would have recognized the art style, but I wouldn't even have known what a fusion was and might have just thought it was an entirely separate character. And of course, before we were doing this, some knowledge of Steven Universe characters was Steven and Garnet. So,
I see. Yeah, it's easy to see like retroactively that this is a blending of these two. But even if you know that fusion exists and you know that Steven and Connie exist, if you had seen Stevonnie, you might not have known that's what that character is. So,
no, especially if I just saw them in passing.
Right. I was just wondering if maybe because we've been in each other's social circles for a long time, and I'm sure I've posted my cosplay and stuff like that, if it had ever rung a bell or anything. I was worried about that.
Yeah. No, I most of the Steven Universe stuff I saw pre-Not So Giant Women was because there was just no context. It just kind of went, oh, that's a thing from Steven Universe, which I don't yet watch. Okay, no need to store that.
Yeah. That is how I am about a lot of things. But, when it's something really in your face, like images of characters that you don't know who they are, but you've seen them kissing, you're like, okay, either this is a really common fanship or this is something that these characters are together. If I start watching it, I'll be like, those two kiss at some point.
In this very specific case, it probably helped that I was dimly aware of fusions from Dragon Ball Z. And so any notion of a fusion just kind of got diverted into my non-watching of Dragon Ball Z as to a thing I don't have to think about before I knew what a fusion was in Steven Universe land.
It's good, because now you have to deal with 4 of them. You have a new one. Yeah. So that is that. And this might end up being one of our longest episodes.
Quite possibly. He's looking at the timer on our... I don't know if it shows it on your end as well, but it shows we've been on for like 5 hours.
Oh, good. Well, so yeah, I figured this was going to be a long one because we were going to have a lot to talk about with this one.
Yeah, and well, the previous episode wasn't exactly a quickie either.
I know. I knew we were going to have 2 long ones back to back. I will say that I suspect that the next few are also long talkies.
Oh, wow. I look forward to that.
Yeah, at least I have a lot to say about them. So we're really in season 1B. There are so many awesome new things to talk about. And I love season 1B. It's amazing.
I'm kind of getting the impression and obviously the future is pretty much blind to me, but I'm kind of getting the impression that season 1B is where they start setting up, leaning heavily on the transition between the sort of the monster of the week, the problem of the week of season 1A and heavier stuff of season 2 through 5, 6, depending how you count.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of the future, should I tell you the name of the next one or should we wait and make it a surprise?
Let's tell me the next one just so I've got something to muse on and give an amusingly wrong answer for when we next meet.
Okay, and I'll have to prompt you at the beginning of the next one to tell us what you think too, because it'll belong there as well. But next time we get together for Not So Giant Women, we'll be watching Warp Tour.
Ah, okay. Yeah, stash that one away to think of.
Warp Tour.
I know what warps are by now, of course, but what it could mean beyond that.
Mm-hmm. That'll be fun. And that's the out of order one that this was. Warp Tour was originally shown right after Lion 3, and instead we're following the intended order from Mr. Jones-Cordy.
Was there a reason behind all that, or it just kind of happened?
Reason behind
the shuffling about? Well, either, really. Why one ended up not the other?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure with this. I do know why this one that we watched as episode 36, I know why 37 and 38 needed to go together, but I don't know why they didn't completely rearrange this, because it seems like Alone Together was self-contained enough that you probably could have placed it somewhere else. I really don't know.
I mean, I know on some shows it's mundane stuff like the network says, oh, we want this to grab people when they're back after the break, or
yes,
we want this because it's this holiday and it has this theme in it.
Yeah.
Things like that.
I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think Lion 3 might have been the last episode to air in 2014. And I wonder if that had something to do with them wanting to air it in the correct year to be eligible for the Emmy that it was nominated for, but I have no idea. I'm just speculating at this point.
Yeah.
So.
I have certainly heard tales of things being aired at particular times for particular things. When it comes to a award session, I can't remember which one it was, but I've read about something that they were desperate to get it into a particular award season, so they aired it in one theatre once at some horrid time that almost no one saw, but it counted because they just had to get it in there on a technicality, because they thought the only other option would be to have it early the next year, which would mean the awards was for the next year again, which means there was more than a year between work and award, which might scupper it, or people might just not care anymore.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm just trying to imagine why it would need to be reorganized around that, but I have only a vague theory, and it has to do with the previous episode, so I have no idea. But the end of this season, end of Steven Universe Season 1, was probably the most famous example of things getting switched around. So this is only the first time, and I don't know the reason, but I do know the reason for some of the later ones, but we'll have to figure out. We'll definitely be watching it in the intended order, but there's also a real weird speed bump in there with a non-canon episode that's a crossover.
Oh.
And I know that people are probably groaning, but yes, we'll watch it. And it's infamous as hell, but it technically belongs in season 1. So even though everybody seems to stick it in with season 2 because that's where it aired. But anyway.
Was that, without revealing anything, was that an April Fool's thing? Because I know Cartoon Network, and especially its Adult Swim arm, like to mess around with stuff on April Fool.
Yeah, it didn't air on April Fool's, but I think it actually aired April 2nd, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, well, that's not so bad then.
Yeah, but they did say April Fool's in the episode itself. So, yeah, it's definitely like episode order. I feel like, there's a good argument for saying you should just see it the same as the people who watched it live saw it. But I prefer to watch it how the creators intended it, because I feel like Cartoon Network kind of screwed a lot of people up about this show, where they had huge hiatuses and then they dumped huge amounts of it in bombs. So it's like a lot of people they credit that airing schedule with making them less interested in the show. So I don't know. I'd rather show it to you how the artists wanted you to see it.
Yeah, from some of the things you've said, I've got the impression that the schedule, never mind the order, is somewhat erratic.
Mm-hmm. There was definitely a really terrible thing that happened where the way that Amazon, I think, tends to group their episodes, because these guys are 11 minutes long. They don't want to charge you per episode the way they normally charge people per episode. So they wait until there's 2 and then they drop both of them. And the way they ended up doing that, because of odds and even numbers, is they ended up dropping an episode. There's like a 2-part finale to this season, and they dropped the episode before and the episode after it together before the finale. So you're seeing like a recap and epilogue kind of thing of stuff you haven't seen yet. And that is horrifying to me to imagine that somebody might have experienced Steven Universe that way. I'm so sad for them.
What do things like DVDs and such, what order do they take?
I have the season 1 DVD. I'm pretty sure that it does it in this same order that is an intended order. But for this one, for Alone Together, I'm not sure if they made that switch as per Ian Jones-Cordy's request. I know they went ahead and put the joke episode as number 1 on the season 2 DVD, which probably blew people's minds and made them really angry.
Yeah, there's a similar mess with the original Transformers cartoon, which
there?
In their case, it actually puts the story out of order the way they aired it.
Yeah, this would have too. I mean, for the non-canon episode, it doesn't really matter. But they did like a special at the end of season 1 where they showed a new episode every day for like 5 days. And then there was a 2-parter at one point. But they ended up taking season 2, episode 1, and putting it on immediately after the last episode of season 1. And so a lot of people consider that season 2 episode to be still part of season 1 because it aired all crunched together and is very related. So that's on the season 1 DVD, even though it's technically season 2. And honestly, I've heard Ian Jones-Cordy say, I just don't understand why people bicker about what belongs in what season. It just doesn't matter. And it matters to a lot of people, but whatever. Ask Amazon. Like so many seasons of this. There's like 9 seasons according to Amazon, but it's not true.
Yeah. We, at least on this show, have the benefit of hindsight and be able to work it all out after they've messed it all around.
Yes. And personally, I assure you, you can trust me to show it to you in order that will not mess with you. But some people have very strong feelings about wanting to see it in the airing order for some reason. I don't know why. Most people don't feel that way. Anyway, so we'll watch Warped Tour next time.
All right. Well, join us next time for Warped Tour, y'all.
Yes, please do. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to Ivy and Daria on Not So Giant Women.
You can find episodes of the show in video form by looking up Not So Giant Women on YouTube.
Or in audio form at anchor.fm/Not So Giant Women, or your podcatcher of choice. You can also find us on Facebook.
Audio production by Daria.
Video production and music by Ivy.
Daria can also be heard on Podsploitation, the Ozploitation podcast.
And Ivy at her Steven Universe fan blog at love-takes-work.tumblr.com.
Steven Universe was created by Rebecca Sugar and remains property of Cartoon Network.
No infringement is intended.